Cathal, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really looking forward to chatting. For people who don't know you, could you just give us a brief intro of who you are?
Absolutely. My name is Cathal Conlon. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations for the New England Revolution, which is a Major League Soccer team based just outside of Boston in Massachusetts.
Amazing. I think let's start with the fact that, typically football has very much been like European dominated with the Champions Leagues and Barcelona, Madrid. And then you had this big kind of moment where Messi suddenly went to Inter Miami, which was founded by David Beckham. And then now you've got the World Cup, which is, was hosted partly in the US. And it feels like it's really taking off. And also Apple TV had a kind of new streaming deal. Can you tell us a bit more about the state of the MLS right now and how much has changed recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is season 21 for me with MLS. So I'm sort of seeing the evolution of the league from originally a 12-team league, which formed off the back of the 94 World Cup and struggled early on. It came out of the blocks really strong, but, after about 4 or 5 years was kind of struggling and had taken a step backwards, and the league was, I think there was conversations around folding the league back at that point, and they contracted from 12 teams back to 10, and there was 3 owners at that point. So you had Phil Anschutz, AEG, you had the Hunt family, who had Dallas and Kansas City, and then you had the Kraft family, which owned the Revolution and the Patriots, obviously. But those 3 owners basically decided to get together and keep the league going, and between them operated the 10 teams and sort of sat tight and kept the league with some positive momentum. And then 2002, the US team goes on a bit of a run at the World Cup and interest starts to peak a little bit. And then the Seattle Sounders arrived in 2005, and, we're getting sort of 40,000 people coming to games. So there was a little bit of there could be something going on here. And then the first major tipping point is Beckham, right? So, and there's criticism sometimes around what the league did with Beckham and the Beckham rule and creating this special mechanism, but he was worth every cent that MLS paid him. He forced us as clubs to really evaluate how we're operating as a business and as a league, and how professional soccer players should be treated and how they should behave. And he just forced the standard up, right? And he was packing buildings all over the country, right? And we didn't really see anything like that until Messi arrived, right? And that was the next major tipping point. They're the only 2 guys that have done this. And we've had, your Zlatans and Henrys and Rooney's and Gerrards, and really only those 2 guys are the ones that have driven the business on and off the field to the levels that they did. But MLS, when Beckham arrived, it really was sort of the first spark to relight the flame. Messi was gas on top of a fire, right? So the league's doing really, really well at that point. It's up to 30 teams. There's, I think, 25 brand new soccer-specific stadiums, ton of investment, 29 different ownership groups. Apple TV, as you reference, comes in as the broadcast partner. So everything's going really, really well. Now Messi is just gas on top of that flame. What's interesting as the backdrop to it all is the World Cup, right? And the 26 World Cup, which just finished here, and we've been circling that as a league for a long time for the opportunity that presents. So it's really just been a massive positive spike for the last decade at least, but Messi more recently, now the World Cup, we're anticipating another huge spike in interest.
And in terms of, as a result, during that period of kind of high growth, and you've got, Messi, Beckham coming in, the marketing that you guys are doing has probably had to shift in terms of, you've had that period of almost consolidation where it was 3 families with, still a big league with lots of different brands, but now it's very different where you've got to negotiate with kind of Apple streaming rights, all these types of things. Can you tell us about how that has changed from, let's call it like the family era, although while still being quite successful, to now, Beckham, the Messis of the time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, right? Because within each market, it's so wildly different too, right? If you're in our market, which is fairly packed, right? You have 4 other championship level teams in the Patriots, Bruins, Celtics, Red Sox, right? And soccer is sort of the 5th team in that, right? So you're fighting a battle in that, depending on your market. If you're the Portland Timbers in Oregon, right, you dominate that market. It's a little different for you. So there's changes there that are unique to each market. But I think what's happened is, within your own sport, you're also battling fans of your own sport, which is really unique, right? There's a ton of soccer fans in America that are fans of the Champions League or are fans of the Premier League or La Liga, but are not fans of MLS. Right. And still sort of look down the nose a little bit at MLS potentially, right? And I think what started to change is the standards gotten so much better in Major League Soccer over the past 5 to 10 years. A lot of it due to I'll call it league dictated recruiting sort of strategies, right?
What do you mean by that, sir?
So the league has been really conscious in giving owners the ability to spend beyond the salary cap on certain types of players. So there's an onus on getting young attacking talent, right? So what MLS is sort of trying to do is, can we rival the Mexican League as that first big stepping stone for a lot of talent coming out of South America, right? And we're at a point now where we can. So, you look at someone like Miguel Almiron, right, who was at Newcastle, right? Like his path would never have evolved playing in America up until 10 years ago. Now we're sort of, that talent can come into MLS and do really, really well and then progress on. You don't want to be a selling league forever, obviously, but for where we are now, 30 years in, it's an important step, was to be able to sort of recruit young attacking talent and have that lift the level on the field and then sort of strategically build off that. So I'm getting a little away from your question, but we're now at the point where we have more soccer eyes on us too. So now we're sort of marketing on two different fronts, right? You still have the traditional people who need to be educated around the sport and why they should choose soccer and why is soccer different, versus this is why you, the already soccer fan, should now start investing in your local team, right? So there's a couple of different threads you're trying to pull on.
And I also think it's a really difficult thing where football isn't as embedded into the framework of American life, where, in the UK, people grow up playing football, at school, at playgrounds, stuff like that. So, and often, someone will be wearing a Manchester United t-shirt or Chelsea, and people start to build up an affiliation that way, or maybe it's on a Saturday, your local club. But in the US, it's often, basketball, baseball, or American football. And football, it is getting there, but you don't have that early adoption from young, which often breeds strong brand emotion and affiliation when you're older. So I'd be interested to understand, how on earth do you, in a specific location go, great, there are fans of sports, but we need to convert them to football. Like, how does that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the league and the clubs have done a ton of research around the sports fan, because if you look at who's engaging with Major League Soccer, one of the big groups that is within the ecosystem is what's a traditional US sports fan. Right. So they're actually dabbling in MLS. Right.
Yeah.
So what they've been able to do is drill down in each market as to what are those types of fans interested in seeing? And then where does your club or where does your league match up or not match up? Right. And again, I'll go back to sort of the recruitment laws that were passed. Right. And one of the interesting data points out of that group was that, there's an interest, yes, in the Beckhams and the big names and the Messis and those people, but there's also an interest in young American talent, right? And nurturing young American talent. So, the academy systems are born now, so every club has an academy, and that's starting to grow. And we've started to bring our first couple of players through from our academy into our first team, right? Our left back, or our left-sided, he's a guessing attacker now, but came in as a left back, Peyton Miller, who's been strongly linked with a move to Europe, right? He joined our academy as a 14-year-old and made his debut at 16 in the first team, right? So you're starting to find just you're tailoring your message to whichever the audience is, right? And if you're talking to this group of sports fans, right, there's the stuff they want to learn about, which is young American talent in your team, and can you lean in on those storylines? What is your stadium atmosphere like? What is the game look like on the broadcast, right? And that's where, the league spends a lot of time on Apple TV and obviously making sure the broadcast is top notch, but it's where it's not generationally inherited. How do you make that approach to that younger audience, right? A lot of their entry point to soccer is through the video game or through FIFA, right? Or EAFC, right? So they build an affiliation with almost individual players more than they do clubs.
Exactly.
Right? So how do you start to turn that around and get them to sample the local experience, right? And we're confident once we get you to come to a game, you're going to come back. But it's breaking through that first wall that is a tricky part. And again, depending on which audience you're trying to reach, and marketing in general now, you have to get as personalized as you possibly can with every message. Every data point, everything we learn about you can and will be used against you as we try to bring you through our fan journey, right? So we're constantly building up the profiles. And how do we target and tailor messages? It could be one email newsletter that has 15 different variations on it, depending on who's receiving it and how we tailor the message. But it's tricky to fight that generational battle, right? We're 30 years into MLS, which is theoretically sort of the point where the second generation is coming through now. But it's a little bit slow in that not necessarily kids are taking up the mantle and taking their dad's Revolution scarf and going to the games, right? We're seeing as much that the sort of opinion is, well, everybody in America plays youth soccer as a child. Everybody does. And they play it when they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, and then they drop out and move on. Soccer becomes something that they did when they were with kids with their parents, right? That's sort of what we started fighting against. So we almost have to re-engage.
I think that's really interesting. Could you tell us how you're fighting against that?
Yeah, it's sort of, you have to, when you start to dig in with these groups and find out, and that was a big realization for the league, first of all, was because I think the expectation was from 96, take Massachusetts in general, there's 300,000 kids playing youth soccer. And they said, okay, if we get all those kids and turn them into Revs fans, job done, right? And initially, again, year one is really good, and then, there's issues with the product. Is it as good as it should be? Different issues. But then you get to the point where they age out. And now we're trying to, can you make yourself now attractive to a student, right? Or a young adult with disposable income who wants to either re-engage with the sport or find something different to do within sport. There's a shifting landscape in American sports to begin with that's helping us, right? That the NFL is a giant, right? But has sort of slowed in its growth. And this is why they're making such a big international push, right? They're huge, so there's not really much room for them to go anywhere. But a combination of concussion issues that have parents thinking twice about youth participation in the NFL has started to slow a little bit. Major League Baseball really aged out. That's why they've started to change their game from a 4-hour game back to a 2.5-hour game. They're trying really hard on pace of play. Hockey has a very niche fan base. They're diehard and passionate, but not really growing, but they're passionate. So you're left with soccer and the NBA, who are in that sort of sweet spot time-wise, that our game's 90 minutes. Right now, it might be hydration breaks, might expand it a few minutes here or there, right? But you generally know you're out of there in 2 hours, right? So we have a much more enticing sports for someone who might want to go to live sport. So when you look at where all these soccer stadiums are popping up across America, right? They're all in urban downtown areas, right? All the NFL stadiums are all out in the suburbs because you wanted parking for 80,000 people. All these soccer stadiums are very back to what we grew up looking at in the Premier League, right? Where it's stadiums are right in neighborhoods in urban areas. And the idea is that the people in this, mystical 18 to, it's not even 34 anymore, 18 to 25, 26 bracket, if they can walk to the game and it becomes easily accessible for them to reach it, your product, you hope, does the rest. And when you stack us up against the other major sports, it starts to become a much more attractive proposition, right? But your product has to be right. So there's a couple of different ways to lean in against them. But, for us, our big challenge with us is our stadium geography. We're 25 miles outside of Boston, right? It's hard to get here. And that's why, our owners are committed to trying to build a soccer stadium closer to Boston, right? For hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's to, just create that easily accessible environment, but also one that's much more intimate for the sport, because that's what really drives the sport forward. If you look at, the capital investment in stadiums in MLS is off the charts in the last 10 years.
And so in terms of, obviously it makes a lot of sense where, if you can walk to a venue, more people are going to go and you're more likely to capture people who are, maybe 50-50, they go to a game, suddenly love it and they're kind of bought in. But I also think, I'm a big football fan, but I don't go to loads of games, but I still connect with it a lot via organic social or clips or, highlights. Can you tell us how and that's how the majority of people will obviously consume or watch football. Could you tell us how you make sure that, okay, you're at a disadvantage because your stadium is outside of the city, but how do you make sure that people who can't go there in person still get the same experience?
Yeah, you can never really recreate the experience, right? So it's more about identifying the pieces of the game that we think appeal to which particular audience. And then serving them to them wherever they are, right? And it's not, that big shift in marketing from how we used to tactics that we used to have, right? Was, your old school traditional media. You sort of relied on the fact that everybody picked up the Boston Globe and read it every day. So you stick an ad in that and you'll capture people. It's just not that way anymore. And we have to market to you on your terms, right? So we need to identify the pieces of the game that we think are the ones that are most attractive depending on the audience. And that's not always the obvious thing. Right. We've, some of the funniest things that tell us. Well, we've a player who's prone to an overhead kick, right? Yeah. At weird times. Right. And, it might be easier to just head the ball away.
Yeah.
But he'll bike it away. And, the coach is going crazy and everyone's like, what are you doing? Just head it away. But you get this from the fans, right? Because it's wow. Right. So now you're like, okay, for a certain segment of our audience, we're going to feed them the bicycle kick because
Yes.
But if we're talking to the more sort of purist audience, then we'll pull together the 28 pass sequence. that led to a goal or a chance, and we'll feed that in a different channel. And it's trying to just take the game and be as customized as you can, depending on the audience that you're trying to reach. And look, on a global scale, this is where the Apple TV deal has been really helpful for the league, right? Because you can,
for people who don't know, could you tell us a bit more about the Apple TV deal?
Yeah. So like the entire league is on the Apple TV platform. So in the first few years, it was behind the paywall, so it was an additional subscription on top of the paywall. So you had to have what was called MLS Season Pass. That's since has taken down. So now if you're an Apple TV subscriber, you can watch MLS from wherever you are in the world. Every game is on live everywhere in the world. So from a global standpoint now, we've started to put our product literally in front of eyeballs all over the world. So, at the local levels for us, right, we can, for example, we have a young Argentinian attacking player on our team who came up through the Boca Juniors system, right? We know our games are getting watched in his hometown, right? You can start to have some fun and play with the platform that way. From a global standpoint for MLS, it obviously opens up a global audience now for partners and marketing and sponsorship deals, right? So it's a huge deal global. Like my family's still back in Ireland, right? Can watch Revolution games on Apple TV every weekend, right? It's just it's a fundamental shift. Now, it's not without its issues, right? In local markets, a lot of people who don't have Apple TV or don't want to have Apple TV, we had a really strong local partner in the Boston area that was broadcasting our games and a really strong audience. And that sort of falls victim to the Apple TV deal, but you got to weigh, the pros are so large on the league level. Yeah. But it's just it's fundamentally changed how we can talk about who's watching our games, how we can pull the content down, the associated content with it. Apple are very good about positioning the league next to Ted Lasso, for example, that's back now, right? Like there's a lot of soccer levers, football levers to pull that didn't necessarily exist 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think the part to go back to, you mentioned about the football player that kind of kicks the ball away in an extravagant manner when they usually could just pass it away or kick away simply, is a brilliant example of sometimes when maybe you don't have superstars or world stars on your team, like a Lamine Yamal, or players where people just follow the player instead of the team. It's how do you be creative and find those small things within the team and the group of players that you've got. You tell us, like, some of the difficulties when you don't just have these big names that you can rely on. You know that if you put their name on a social campaign, it's going to go super viral. And as a result, you need to be a bit more creative. Could you tell us maybe some examples of how you guys are trying to tell stories about your players to make sure that people go, actually, I do want to start following or learning about X player?
Yeah, it's hard. Right? Obviously we play at Gillette Stadium, right? And we just had Mbappé and Holland, and we had all these star players in our building, and all delivering and all showing up. And people's.
I bet you want them to just stay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, can we just lock the doors and keep them
exactly.
In? Yeah. And people's that are just first coming into the sport, and this is their entry point, was this tournament, and they're like, sort of the naivety of how come you guys just don't go and sign one of these players, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to get into sort of nuances of it has to be the right time for the player, yada yada yada.
Yes.
Right. So it's, with that aside, you have to sort of identify again what are the stories within your team. Where can you draw some links? Obviously, right. So our captain, our best player, played with Aston Villa in the Premier League, right? You can start to draw, but it all depends again who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to the Champions League soccer snob guy, you're wasting your breath, because he's going to be like, well, yeah, but if he was any good, he'd still be playing in the Premier League, right? So you sort of immediately are fighting that uphill battle with that person, and frankly, MLS, we wasted a lot of time as a league chasing what they would call the soccer snob, right? Because we ultimately don't have what they want. They want the best soccer in the world, right? And MLS does not provide that. They want the Champions League, and they want the Premier League, La Liga, maybe Bundesliga, and that's it. Anything else is inferior. So it's not even a knock on MLS. It's just we're not those. So when you stop trying to chase that and start to think about, this gets back into what do the actual people want? What are they looking for? And you, as we mentioned earlier, you get into some people are more interested in that young attacking talent. You get some people that are interested in, do you have hyper local stories you can tell, right? Like, there's a huge Brazilian community here in Boston, right? And the Boston area, New England, right? And we've, the joke has always been, just go sign Neymar,
Yeah.
right? And it'll be fine. And they'll all come to the game and you'll sell out 50,000 people every game. It'd be great.
I mean, he's not
right?
playing a lot, so it's probably a good time.
Right. Right. What's resonating though is we have a kid we just signed into our first team squad whose parents are Brazilian. He was born and raised in Somerville, Massachusetts. He was born and raised playing soccer here. He came up through our academy, through our system, and now he's on the verge of the first team. And when he made his debut last year in the cup competition and scored a goal, and the reaction was incredible, right?
Yeah.
Like and that whole sort of immediate, like entire Brazilian fan base was like, "Oh my God, this is incredible!" Like, because he's like, this is the next phase for us, right? This is he's ours and he's on our team now, right? So it's almost as important to pick away and find each player has their own story and what is the thing we can lean into, because we can't all go and sign we can't go and get Mbappé in Holland and call it a day. But I think that layer of what is the engaging piece that we can lean in on, whether it's the players' own personalities or what they do off the field or their story or where they're from, the storytelling has to be rich. And we have to be able to, again, repackage it, redistribute it depending on who's looking for it.
It reminds me of, you see a lot of NBA players actually starting to do those videos with GQ, or even football players, from the Spain team, where it's kind of, you've got Pau Kabasi, the Spanish defender, and it's, what's in your bag, or what are some things that you always travel with? And those types of videos where, we always see Kabasi playing football, but you never really see him talking about actually he reads a notebook and he brings this, or he brings this when he's traveling. And I think for players who maybe aren't at the level of, the Messi or Mbappé, where you just need the football to do the talking, it gives people a common thread to go, actually, like, I like this player because of X other things, and they become way more engaged.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that helps us with that is the accessibility of our players, right? Because we're still a baby. We're 30 years in as a professional league. There are certainly superstars in the league, as we all know, but the majority of players in that dressing room are down to earth guys that are not really, they're not paid to the levels where they can carry themselves a certain way. Like, they're mostly accessible and down to earth, and they'll, there's simple tactical things that we like to do as a club, right? When our players are out doing appearances and stuff, we don't like to put any physical restriction between them and they're not behind a table. They're just with people, right? We want to create that idea that you can come and talk to our athletes. They're accessible and you can be part of this whole big thing that is the New England Revolution. It's your team, right? We want you to be part of that journey. If we have watch parties for our away games and are bringing our players to, right? They're just in there with the crowd. They're just mingling. Like, they're just part of the crowd that's there. It's not this, we try not to put any sort of restrictions up to keep the fans away from interacting with the players. And again, the more they can get to know them on that personal level, the better for everybody. The nuance for us is, but we still have to tell people that Carlos Heel, our captain, is a really, really good player. We still have to show people that he's a really, really good player, right? So when those moments present themselves and he does something on the field that's like unquestionably good, no matter what league you're watching or what level you're watching, right? The onus is on us to make sure that goes everywhere. Right. And that's part of the education process around, there's a handful of players that are in that Messi bracket globally. There's many, many more players that are at the level of MLS players. And I think for a long time, we sort of, as a league, felt the need to apologize for the standard of the league. The biggest mind shift now is that by any metric, Major League Soccer is a top 10 league in the world, by any metric, from attendance all the way to quality of play. So we don't have to hide from it anymore. We can embrace it and shout it that we have a very talented league. It's a very good league. And I think, if you still question that, you're probably just not paying attention. And some of that's our fault, right? And some of that's, we need more, I think, evangelicals, from among our fan base to be the ones to spread the word. Because obviously, if the commissioner of Major League Soccer is telling you his league is great, well, he sort of has to. Right? That's, the whole user-generated content and, the whole influencer model, right, becomes helpful if you do it right, but then you need the credibility of the fan, comes into question. So it's tricky, but I think in general we're much more bullish about who we are as a league than we used to be.
100%. And I think obviously the World Cup's just finished and it's been a major pivot for the MLS in terms of exposure, and especially, you know, with some of the Scottish fans coming over, and there was that whole kind of collaboration with the American fans. Can you just tell us, like, what happened post World Cup and what you guys did as a team to prepare for it, and also afterwards?
Yeah. So we've had it circled for years on the calendar as you know, a really once in a lifetime opportunity for the clubs and for the league to capture the whole enthusiasm around the sport and when it's in the country and in America. And like we said, in 94, the whole league was born off it in 94 when it was here the last time. So we already know there's this seismic opportunity, and we've been, you know, circling it for years and coming up with the ideas and how do we make sure we capitalize, right? So our major tactic was this concept of your next match is on us, right? If you're watching the World Cup, your next live soccer game you go to is on us, right? Now, as long as you've never been to a Revolution game before, right? So if you've never been to a Revs game before, we're going to give you 2 tickets to come to a game, right? And we ran this all the way through the World Cup. We had an additional 10,000 people into our database of our next home game coming out of the World Cup. All brand new customers, right? So now we have the ability to speak to that group, obviously, but now we can nurture them through our whole system and try and track where they go once they've started. They're brand new soccer fans now. What sort of journey can we take them on and bring them through the whole event? The tactics is the tricky part because it's ever evolving, right? And that's where, you know, when you devise these things 4 years ago and then you get to now and you're in a world where the tactics have changed rapidly again, right? So you're constantly sort of, okay, well, it can't just be a billboard campaign now. Now it's got to be, we have to be here and here, and what can we layer in, and should we turn this down? And now it's streaming TV and podcast networks, and how do we balance it all, and how quickly can we react, right? And, you know, we have Messi and Miami are coming here towards the end of the season, right? And Messi does something unbelievable at the World Cup. How quickly can we push that game that he's coming here into people's forefront? How can we do that? How quickly can we do it, right? So the plan was always there, and I think the tactic was there, and we have a smart idea. It's just the actual tools change so quickly that you're sort of upside down from where you thought you were.
100%. And we know we spoke about this previously about the kind of half-life of content and a moment when it happens. And, you know, it used to be, okay, maybe someone scores and it gets published in the newspaper the next day. Now it's, okay, you know, minute 36, there was some funny moment with this player and this player, and they had a bit of an altercation. If that's not on socials in the next 3 minutes, you're not capitalizing. How do you make sure that you and your social teams move at the speed of culture?
Yeah, look, I think if I told you we nailed it, I would bottle it and sell it to everybody around the world, because I think the second you think you figured it out, it moves again, it shifts again. You know, I think it all comes back to, this is not groundbreaking, but it all comes back to making sure the content, A, you have it ready to go as quickly as you possibly can, but B, that it's packaged correctly for the correct platform, and they're all so different in themselves and they're so unique. I'll give you, like, for example, we have a Nigerian international player on our team. Facebook is now a massive tool for us again. It was dead, but every piece of content that involves this player pops off on Facebook, because there's a huge Nigerian community on Facebook, right? So we're sort of learning as we go how each platform responds to the content and who's engaging with it. And then I would never have told you a year ago when we were budgeting that we'd be putting any money towards Facebook, but that's where people want. Every time we put anything out about this player, Facebook explodes, right? So you got to be, I think, listening and paying attention to every piece of content you put out and then adjusting accordingly. But ultimately, I can tell you that within 5 minutes of Messi scoring against England, right, we're putting an ad into or pushing it on social. What happens to people's algorithms? I mean, that's, you sort of hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
But it's being able to respond as quickly as you possibly can. You obviously are taking a flyer, you're creating all your assets ahead of time that if he does something, we're ready to go and ready to attack. But it changes so quickly. You know, I think the consumers are looking for something slightly different from us too.
What do you mean by that? Tell me a bit more.
There's an increasing demand for just authenticity in your message. And, you know, I think it's so easy to end up in someone's ad blocker now these days that, you know, I think we run everything through 50 filters to make sure that it doesn't appear as if, you know, yes, ultimately we want you to engage and buy a ticket, right? But we have to be as authentic as we possibly can in what we're putting out and why we're talking about it, right? So the Messi example where he scores against England and it's like, or that game happens against England, he's unbelievable. And you're like, we're going to push this out as the revolution, right? And we're going to have to let you assume a little bit that you understand that he's coming to play here without us saying, buy tickets to see Messi in Foxborough at the end of the year, right? So there's a little bit of nuance in how you're doing it, but as the consumer becomes more sophisticated around our sport, but also just around who they want to do business and align themselves with, you got to be careful, and you got to make sure that you're being authentic to the sport and authentic to your region as much as you possibly can, and hope that people give you enough rope. Give us the rope and we'll take you and we'll bring you on the journey. But you got to get the door cracked open a little bit before if you go in there and just start dragging them, they'll push back. So you got to get them down the road, and then once we get you in and get you into our system, then we'll tease you down the road depending on how you interact with us. We'll pick a different path. You're almost choosing your own adventure.
And at the start, going back to what you said around how you think that one of the things that the MLS got wrong at the start is they were almost targeting the soccer snob who ultimately prefers, the Champions League is going, well, why don't we have, all the biggest, the Mbappés and the Haalands in the MLS? And it's just not feasible, especially, at this point in their careers. Could you tell us so you've shifted from targeting the soccer snob. What is your current ideal kind of American consumer, or, someone who lives in America consumer? Like, who are they? And how do you make sure that you're kind of reaching them? What's that change been?
Yeah. So I'll give a lot of credit to sort of League HQ on this, right? They did a massive study, and it's been ongoing on an annual basis for probably close to 10 years now. But the initial sort of investigation was around the soccer watching audience in America, not just MLS, the entire sport. Who's watching it? Who's engaging? What are they watching? And then what do they look like, right? And once they identified what each fan looks, there's about 9 different types of fan that they identified. They range everywhere from the soccer snob all the way down to, let's call it, for want of a better term, the soccer mom, right? So then they take a step down, they drill into what are those types of fans actually looking for from the teams they engage with. So when you lay it all out in a map and you find out that the soccer snobs are a very, very small part of the audience, but they're very vocal. Right, so they're the ones that are on social media telling everybody the MLS sucks. But when you drill down, it's a very, very small audience. So we're wasting a lot of energy chasing a group that, even if we turn them all around, they don't impact the business at a point where we need them to. The 2 groups that stood out, and they were about, let's call it 30% of the overall soccer watching audience, but they're driving almost 60% of the engagement with MLS, right?
Wow.
So very impactful, right? And those 2 types of fans, and one is what's, the general sports fan. So here are your Red Sox, Bruins, Celtics, Patriots fan. And then they term like a soccer enthusiast. So someone who likes the sport, likes all the other sports, likes soccer, will watch their local team, is engaged with a local team, is not a soccer snob. Right? So they like the sport, they probably play it. Those 2 types of fans. So now we know we can drill in on them and say, what are they looking for? Right. So if you try to identify some common threads, right, of they both really want to see exciting attacking play. They both really want to see young local product. Neither one of them actually cares about big name players.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. They want a good in-stadium atmosphere, and they want a good TV product, stuff like that. So that you can start to now build a strategy that if the research is correct and you trust it is, that these 2 groups, if you get it right and you get appeal to them, they will engage and they'll lift, they'll bring people with them, and you sort of start to build from there. Each market has different nuances, right? So Portland, Oregon is a very relatively small market compared to ours. Dominated by the soccer team, right? So they have a different set of fans to target there. Our sort of next biggest group beyond those 2 is around, let's call it the youth soccer market, right? Because our stadium is huge, so we can sell a ton of tickets to youth soccer. Not all the stadiums in MLS can do that. We have a big audience around youth soccer, so we know that's fertile, and we can dig in on that, and we know what they want. So you can start to build different marketing platforms and themes for different audiences that you market in totally different ways. Like, we have a youth soccer marketing campaign that the sports fan will never see. They never overlap, right? Never.
And what is actually in that campaign for people, other sports marketers watching this are probably interested? Yeah.
So if you're talking to for youth soccer audience, for example, we had a game last weekend that there's a 4v4 youth soccer tournament on the field before the game. That's the major hook for those people, right? So now it becomes spend the whole day with your family, get to play on the field, have this tournament, that becomes the pitch versus the main market audience, right? And we had a whole social justice theme around the game last week, which was targeted to a very different group. They're both happening at the same game. They're both part of our match day presentation, but the two groups they're never combined. They're just different threads because depending on who we're talking to. So you're sort of given enough information that you can try to build out these bespoke platforms that now, of course, every now and again they'll rise up to be mass market. We're going to do a Marvel night later this year, right? It'll be mass market. If we did a Star Wars night, mass market, right? So there are things like that. But when you get into the nuances of we're going to talk specifically to a group about this game, the ideas and the reasons we want them to come to the game are different because we know they want different things from us.
And this question is kind of two strands. The first strand is to any other CMOs or VPs of marketing at sports brands. What's the one thing that you've learned in the last year that you kind of, as a mistake that you've made that you wish you didn't do, and the advice that you would share to them to say, do not do this?
I think I would go back to the Facebook example, right? If it's don't write anything off. I would not have envisioned that Facebook would be any part of our marketing mix other than accidentally or other than just because. But if you look at how people respond and what happens, and suddenly it's a major part of our armory again. So I think just, you got to evaluate. It used to always be, where's your ROI, and track your ROI and evaluate. I don't think it's that simple anymore. I think some level of loss leader is okay.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be able to sort of holistically evaluate every piece of content or every tactic you use and be willing to admit that, yeah, okay, I think the whole world might be moving on from Facebook, but we're not because we have for whatever reason, it's resonating with the price of our audience and it's working for us. So if it's working for us, that's good enough. So I think eyes open, ears open, evaluate and adjust.
100%. I really like the Facebook point. And the second strand to that question is for people who are not in sports marketing, but CMOs in maybe tech businesses or home improvement or whatever they might be, what is something unexpected about sports marketing that you would say you have no idea that and you're maybe very lucky that you don't have to deal with this, or actually you're missing out on this?
I think the nature of sports fans is what keeps us on our toes, right? That they're so passionate and they feel such ownership over everything you do that the most innocuous thing you might do can really offend people. And if you do something,
you gotta be careful.
You do something with a graphic, or you make a reference, or you say something. It seems innocuous, but you have people that have such deep affection and connection to your brand that you can really, really offend people if you're not careful. And I think that's it's the give and take of sports, right? Like we have, on the one hand, we get instant sort of feedback from who shows up at the games and what's the atmosphere like at the games. And did you do a good job? You get instant feedback. If you show up and your promotion fell flat in its face or you don't have a great attendance, then right? That's by the same token, when things go right and they resonate and fans react and you get that visceral sort of collective hug, right? That's the stuff that sports gives you that you just can't get anywhere else.
No, I love it. And then now looking kind of like more towards the future for you guys, you've just come off the World Cup. The US, I feel like, is primed for football being something which, kids are probably saying, I saw Haaland score a couple of goals, or Spain winning, Ferran Torres with the amazing goal. There's more of those conversations happening at the dinner table. So how are you thinking about the next kind of 3, 6 to 12 months to capitalize on that?
Yeah, so I think there's, obviously we had this first campaign that I referenced, right, to try and bring more people into the audience and bring more people into the database. And how do we continue to nurture them along the line, right? I think there's also a level of where we, for example, like the local Boston 25, one of the local news stations, was heavily invested in the World Cup, right? And they had it on every day, right? Where we've built a really close affiliation with that network to now sort of seamlessly transition their sports coverage to include the Revs and keep us front and center, right? And our personalities were the resident experts during the World Cup, right? And keep us in front of people, in the front of the audience as the professional team that's in your marketplace, right? And we're here. Look, the team on the field has to help, right? We have to be good. Yeah. And if we came out with a really good result and that helped, and then we stumbled a little bit last weekend, but we can't rely on that either, but it does help. But I think, from a recruitment standpoint, right, there's a different area of who are the players that are coming into the team, right? We just signed Jack Harrison, right, who played in the Premier League last year and was, is 29 years old and is a good profile and a good age, right? And he's a player that the soccer snobs will have heard of. He's a player that the new fans will know what the Premier League is because he, and it's not the reasons we sign him, but these are the things you talk about, right? Is that it gets back to sort of making sure your message is tailored to whoever you're talking to. But there's just such a tidal wave around the sport now that we got to make sure that every time we show up, that it's at the top level and it looks right and it feels right to people who are new to the sport. Simple little things down to the music that people listen to at the World Cup. You now hear at Revs games.
Yeah,
right?
Shakira.
Shakira, but then you had like John Denver, Country Roads with the US national team randomly, right? That's I Can Boogie, right? That's in our playlist. Like these are, it's just the more things you can layer in, the people who are new to it, it's familiar to them because their first experience was the World Cup. And yes, we can't give you Haaland and Mbappé, but we can give you the same sort of feel you had, and we can make sure you're connected to our fans who feel just as passionately about that as the World Cup. So it's a journey, but we're starting from sort of 3/4 away up the mountain versus 94 and we had nothing.
And now just a couple of quickfire questions. So the first question is, and you can't pick any players within your own team, but who is your favorite football player
of all time?
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, of all time.
Of all time, Steven Gerrard.
Okay, nice. And currently, right now?
Right now is a tougher question. I'm gonna have to think about that because I don't want to give you another Liverpool player because I'm just going to come across really biased. But Gerrard of all time for sure. I think that the Messi Ronaldo debate is over.
Yeah.
After the World Cup, and that's really cool getting to see Messi play here. It's awesome.
Incredible.
And that's I don't take that for granted that I've gotten to do that a few times now. He's incredible.
Yeah.
But
okay, we'll take that. And then which sports brand? They don't have to be in the MLS. They could be, it could be baseball, could be any sport. Do you think they do marketing really, really well?
It's another good question. It'll probably come across as a little bit of a biased answer, but because Adidas are the official partner of the entire league for Major League Soccer, so every club is Adidas, right? So, but I don't say that just because of that. But I think they've done a really good job in the last few years of getting back to sort of the roots of why they were in soccer initially and the traditions of every club or every country and how they bring that back into modern designs like the Germany national team jersey, right? And it's not, it goes beyond just being retro. They're sort of leaning back into what was the real feel around, the sport and what are the emotions it invokes. And, they're doing some really clever stuff, really clever ad campaigns and, TV and visuals, and they're engaging with the right people, and they're considering, what they're up against with Nike, obviously, right? It's a constant knockdown, drag out fight between those two for market share. I think they've done a really good job of recentering around who they are, generationally and what they represent, and connecting people back to, did you wear Sambas when you were a kid, right? And like they're just doing a really good job of doing this rich storytelling around who they are, which is it's not easy to do. And when you have so many sort of upstart brands in their space, that it's easier to be the cool new kid on the block, but I think it's sometimes harder for a legacy brand to reinvent on the fly. I think they're doing a really good job of that.
And also interested to know, which other CMOs at sports brands do you think would make a really good interview for me to interview next?
Wow. I think within the NBA, they're doing some really, really clever things, both at the league and at individual team levels. I think they're doing some really. I think they recognize there's an opportunity really to make some massive headway in the United States. I think you think about the Golden State Warriors and even their arena design, right? They designed one end with like a soccer stand in it, right?
Yeah.
So I think the NBA is doing.
We can get
really
Steve Kerr on. We can get Steve Kerr on the line.
Yeah. I think they're doing some really smart things as a league. So I think baseball, by the same token, have undertaken some massive shifts to who they are as a platform. They were, and I say this with all affection as someone who's lived in Boston for 25 years, right? And a really passionate Red Sox fan. That game became almost impossible to watch. It was 4 hours long.
Yeah.
It's just, people are like, oh my God, get on with it. I can't deal with this. And they fundamentally changed the game to make it back to closer to 2.5 hours with pitch clocks, and
Yeah.
they really focus on speed of play, and it's made a real impact. And I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in baseball. They have a labor dispute coming up, which would be interesting to see how they navigate that, because I think if they end up with a work stoppage, it could be a disaster for them. It would undo a lot of the good work they've done, but they're doing some really interesting things. I think it's always fascinating when a league changes fundamentally who they are based on what society is telling them they want. Right.
Yeah.
And, MLS has done that with its transfer policy, and baseball has done it by fundamentally changing the game. I think that's really, really interesting stuff when that happens.
And final question, what is something that you wanted me to ask you that I haven't?
Well, I mean, you sort of by asking me who my favorite player was, you sort of got me to confess my Liverpool fandom. But no, I think I hit on it. But I think if people were to take anything away, is if you haven't watched an MLS game recently, or you're sort of poo-pooing MLS, just give it a shot.
Yeah.
If you're in the US, or you're going to be in the US and the local team are playing, go watch it. Like it's a really cool take, and the product's really good. The standards are really good, and do not be shocked a decade from now when MLS is right up there with those leagues.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for creating the show. It was such a lovely chat. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.